Welcome to the Point. 2020 continues to be a trying year. After a contentious election, a resurgence of COVID-19 has some, like Democratic U.S. Senator Gary Peters, saying, put the election behind us and find a way to work together to fight a resurgent threat from COVID-19. Senator, we're a week and a half past the election. There are still questions and challenges going on, but for the most part, as we take a look here in the state of Michigan, we have a good feel for where we are. Tell me about this election cycle and your takeaway as we now have it in the rearview mirror to a large degree.
Well, the election is over in Michigan. It's clear if you look at the votes that were cast. So we need to move forward. It's important for us to deal with a very tough issues that we face as a country. And right now, without question, it's the COVID crisis. We're seeing cases continue to increase in Michigan as well as across the country. We need to be focused on that. I know there have been concerns that have been raised by our local hospitals in terms of capacity. It's critically important that we make sure that folks are wearing masks, practicing the social distancing. We knew this was going to happen, or very likely to happen, I should say. The health experts, back when the COVID crisis first came on the scene, they talked about a potential spike in the fall as people move indoors and the weather changes. So this shouldn't be a surprise to folks, but we've got to put our guard back up again. And we need to have national leadership. We got to have a coordinated national strategy to make sure we're doing even more testing, making sure that we're dealing with that. And unfortunately, we have a president right now that's distracted with frivolous lawsuits when he needs to really be stepping up and making sure that we're dealing with this crisis. Lives are literally at stake right now.
What would you have this or the next president do in terms of approaching COVID? We've heard from some of the people that may well be in the next administration talking about a national shutdown, perhaps for 4 to 6 weeks. Is that part of the prescription?
Well, I hope it's not. I don't think any of us want to have a shutdown, but we each, as individuals, we have the power to prevent that, and that's by wearing masks. By making sure that we're not congregating in groups, to make sure we're washing our hands, keeping social distancing. We can do that. That's why we should not politicize this anymore. I would hope folks would understand that wearing a mask is not a political statement. It is public health, and folks who are not wearing a mask make it more difficult for us to get our arms around the spread of this virus. So, as Americans, we can all do our part. We can seize control as much as possible by all doing our part and being responsible. And I certainly hope folks would heed that advice. There are some encouraging signs on the horizon. We've got information or an announcement, as you know, from Pfizer that came out this week about a vaccine that's showing great promise, but it'll take time. And I want to just caution folks that although this this vaccine has great promise, there are a lot of logistical challenges that need to be worked out. This is not an easy vaccine to get out. It has to be very low temperatures in order to be shipped and maintained. You need 2 doses, so it's going to take a major logistical effort. And that's where the federal government has to be up on it 110% to make sure we're doing that. There are likely other vaccines that are going to be coming out as well. So I want to encourage folks that there is light at the end of this tunnel, but we have to do our part right now. We all have to come together and understand, I'm tired of wearing a mask. I'm tired of the inconveniences like everybody else. But we just have to hunker through this. If we do this over the next couple months, we're going to be hopefully in a better spot. But it's important for us to make sure that we're doing our part and assuming the kinds of responsibility necessary to make sure we keep ourselves safe and equally, if not more important, everybody around us. When you wear a mask, you're keeping everybody around you safe. You're telling the world, I care about you.
It's interesting because you talk about you're tired. We hear about some of the fatigue that goes along with this that doesn't really matter to a virus that continues to spread. But you also said, over the next couple of months, and if we go all the way back to the primary, we were hearing just for a few weeks, flatten the curve. And we've continued over the course of the summer. We saw numbers and cases go down. And now we're seeing this spike again that you're talking about. And for some people, I think they question how long are we going to be dealing with this, even with the vaccine? Because as you point out, the vaccine isn't going to be universal or immediate.
Well, that's right. But we knew, or at least the epidemiologists, scientists, they never know completely because we're clearly dealing with a novel virus here, coronavirus. But if you look at how these viruses act, is that they are more active in late fall and in winter. This one came about towards the end of the winter. So there was always the expectation that this could come back. We saw it in the Spanish flu back in the early 1900s, the same thing. It came back with a vengeance in the fall after folks thought that it was relatively under control. And so we know in summer, for example, you can be outside a lot. You can go to restaurants and sit outside, and it's a delightful experience to do that. We also know it's less than delightful to do that in January in Michigan, that you need to be indoors. And that's the other thing about what we have to be doing here in the Senate. We have to put together a COVID relief package to make sure that our small businesses survive. I've been hearing from businesses across the state that are terrified as to what's happening as they see these cases go up, and they need to survive. We can't get an economy up and running as quick as we'd like and as normal as we'd like if our small businesses don't survive what we're seeing happening right now. So it is critical that we have all hands on deck dealing with the public health aspects of it, making sure individuals are doing their part to make a difference. But also making sure we're helping vulnerable businesses and families who may find themselves once again unemployed for no fault of their own and worry about putting food on the table, a roof over their head. We have to treat this very, very seriously. We have to be focused on that 100% right now. And it's a critical time for the history of our country.
Well, give me your take on that, because for months, the House, the Senate, and the White House have not been able to come to an agreement on another stimulus package that you say is critical. And now we're at this critical moment when I'm not really sure what's happening in Washington or if it's possible to get anything done in the current circumstance. So are the odds better that you can get some type of a stimulus package put together now? Or was it better before the election? Or will it not come about until after Inauguration Day?
Well, I hope it comes about soon because we have to act. I say the thing that was different, what we heard from Mitch McConnell, who refused to take up in a meaningful way legislation that, as you know, passed the House. They passed two different versions, in fact, out of the House to deal with it. Mitch McConnell and his caucus were not interested in dealing with it. They didn't put up a real offer on the table. And part of their rationale, if you want to call it that, was that, well, maybe things are getting better. We're not going to need it. Well, things are getting worse now. The numbers are pretty clear. They're getting worse. And the one thing we certainly learned before, and I hope we don't forget this lesson, is that if you don't stay ahead of the virus, you let a virus get ahead of you, it's really difficult to catch up. You've got to stay ahead of it. And we're starting to see the surge. We better start leaning in heavily, understand if it gets ahead of us, then we may have to do things that none of us want to do. So let's stay ahead of us. Let's take the preemptive action that we know is important, and let's do that now.
What is it that can be done at the federal level? You talked earlier about a coordinated plan at the federal level. What can be done at the federal level to encourage one of the things you talked about, wearing masks? I mean, if you have a federal mask mandate, that's one thing, but how do you enforce that mandate?
That's why I think everybody has to be outspoken about it. I would hope whether the president would come out very forcefully and really stress the importance of everybody to wear a mask, to maintain social distancing, not to congregate in big groups. Clearly, he did not do that during the election. He continued to have these rallies, which many folks say were super spreader rallies around the country. That's simply not the kind of leadership that we can tolerate and have in this country anymore. We need someone who's going to step up and encourage their supporters to engage in activities that our public health experts and epidemiologists say are critical for us to make sure that we slow the spread of this virus. So we all have to do our part. National leadership now, and especially from folks like the president, is critically important. And I would hope that the president would come out of the White House or wherever he is and make the kinds of strong statements necessary for us to prevent the spread as much as possible of this virus. That national leadership is desperately needed right now. Obviously, we're in a challenging time when you have a president focused on frivolous lawsuits and attempting to undermine the integrity of our elections when we should be celebrating these elections. We had record turnout. People all across the country turned out. folks who were exercising their constitutional right. And I just think of the poll workers. These were folks who came out, they knew we're in a COVID issue, they were serving, they were counting ballots. These were incredible volunteers who were patriotic Americans. We should be celebrating all of that. And then moving forward now and dealing with the main crisis impacting this country, which is the COVID crisis, and getting this under control so we can get our economy up and running as quickly as possible the way we want in a long-term sustainable way. Right now, that's in jeopardy, and we need to address it right now.
But not everyone is ready to move on. You'll hear another view of the election rehash later in this show. But next, to Lansing and continued divided government. What's next for state lawmakers as we move into the winter months and the holidays? That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Grand Rapids Democrat Rachel Hood says it's time for the legislature to get back to work after the election. She says there needs to be some leadership from those in charge when it comes to COVID-19. Tell me what it looks like for the rest of this fall, even though you'll be on a limited schedule.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rick. I really appreciate all the opportunities that I have to talk to voters through Wood TV 8. Just today, our session tomorrow has been canceled. So we expect that we will be off on hunting break for the next 2 weeks at minimum, through the holidays. Coming back to session in early December with a myriad of policy opportunities to work on.
You talk about policy opportunities, but the question becomes, will Republicans and Democrats be able to take advantage of that opportunity? Now, you and I had a conversation about a very successful round with Democrats and Republicans putting together a budget for the current fiscal year. It came together, I think, against the odds in pretty short order, and I think most people on both sides thought it was a pretty healthy budget. Does that kind of cooperation still exist?
I'm hopeful that it does, but we know that historically Michigan's lame duck sessions have brought forward some pieces of legislation that lean away from more moderate decision making. So I anticipate that we will have some representatives and senators who, at least representatives who are in their last term, hopeful to move forward certain pieces of legislation within the next several days in weeks in order to finish off their work that they have in front of them. I am hopeful that we will also see a good handful of work that's just good for Michigan. I myself have some bills focused on lead poisoning and lead poisoning prevention that I feel are really important that I hope will move forward. Things like that help kids, help seniors, help families succeed. I'm sure we'll see plenty of those good news stories as well.
When you look ahead to January and you look at a different composition, but more or less numerically the same in the House, you've got new leadership on the Democratic side, there'll be new leadership on the Republican side, and there are still going to be a lot of questions about the state's response to COVID-19. And in a lot of ways, the numbers, the players may have changed a little bit, but the numbers haven't changed all that much. And I suspect that the basic ideas behind that response may not have changed. So what does the legislature have to do from your perspective if we will continue, and it seems absolutely very likely that we will still be right in the middle of this fight against a pandemic?
Yeah, we're in a really precarious spot, Rick. And in West Michigan and in other communities across the state, we are seeing that the second wave is hitting just as hard as the first. And numbers continue to go up, not just the numbers of people who have been diagnosed with the disease, but also the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths. It's incredibly important right now that we take actions to protect our families. And my family is certainly becoming less active as we move past the election season, focusing instead on our home and making sure we're keeping our family safe. I hope that others across Michigan are looking at these numbers and doing that in the same way. Unfortunately, we are not seeing the leadership that we need from the legislature, and that's incredibly frustrating because when we had executive leadership through the emergency acts, we were able to move forward on protecting people. But right now, because of the Supreme Court decision, we are working through the administration through DHHS to address the public health crisis, and the steps that the legislature could take have been ignored to date by the majority party, who really sets this conversation up and moves forward our ability to put in place laws and protections and resources for the people of Michigan. We are at a standstill, and it's a very dangerous one.
What specifically would you like to see the GOP leadership take up that you would think could be helpful in terms of keeping people safe and maybe shortening the duration of this pandemic?
We need to see strong leadership from them in regard to consistent messaging around wearing masks, around acknowledging that this is becoming a crisis situation, and that behaviors, the choices that people across Michigan make, are going to make the difference about whether or not we are able to put COVID away in 2021, or if we have to wait until 2022. We need real enforcement of mask laws among employers, among businesses that are open to the public. We need to make sure that there's just no question in the minds of the people of Michigan about how they should be behaving, and the choices they should be making in the midst of a pandemic. It's my belief that it's also very dangerous to open schools right now. Kids may not be negatively impacted, but our teachers are. And we know that COVID is moving through our schools, even if we don't see it or feel it, and ultimately impacting those people who are vulnerable around us. And I'm very concerned about what this means as we enter into winter and into the holidays. I myself have parents and family members who are vulnerable to COVID. We need to protect them.
Up next, even though the legislature is off for the next couple of weeks, a Republican lawmaker thinks there's a chance for cooperation between the executive and legislative branch. That's next. To the point. Welcome back. Republican Representative Mark Huizenga from Walker says there's room for cooperation on Lansing, and he also says just because Republicans have proceeded with looking into the election results doesn't mean there's a lack of confidence in the process. Representative, let's start with where we are after this election cycle. There are still some elements of it that are unsettled, but for the most part, we think that Republicans will still remain in control of the House of Representatives. And of course, nothing changed in the state Senate. What is your plan of attack as you move into the lame duck session?
Well, I guess I'd say first and foremost that integrity in elections is of the foremost importance to all of us. And I think this is one of the classic cases of trust but verify. And as we've seen that there have been rumors or ideas that there are potential fraud or problems counting or mysterious ballots, those kind of things, we can never discount those things. And there was a joint task force that's looking at that process. They've subpoenaed a number of documents from the Secretary and the Board of Elections. I don't think that's necessarily anything that's completely new, but I think it's one of those things that happens every cycle where we just have to validate and make sure that it's right. I hold the election process of its highest integrity and want to ensure that's that way for all of us.
Are you concerned that by taking some of these moves by the Oversight Committee, looking into this, that it calls into question the integrity of the election process?
No, I think actually it does the opposite. It should validate that the election process was very good. And I'll give you a quick example of that. Early this year, I was at a meeting and a constituent came to me and said, "Boy, I'm really concerned about voter fraud and X, Y, and Z." And I said, as a former mayor, I work closely with our clerk and believe in the integrity of that process completely. And I said to him, I said, but I can only tell you what I hear secondhand. I said, there's another clerk over here from another township. Let's go over here and talk to her about what's happening, how that process works, and let's validate or invalidate what you think is happening. He walked away from that situation and said, wow, it sounds like there are lots of checks and balances in place, and that's what we want to hear. And I can say that I've spoken with many clerks around this area who have an incredibly passionate degree of accuracy.
Post-election, we hear a lot of calls for people saying we have to come together, we have to work together. The governor and the legislature have not had a clear track record on working together, but now with COVID cases spiking and what appears to be a second wave, with hospital beds becoming full and with concerns about that, is there anything that the legislature and the governor can agree on, that can come together on to somehow bolster the state's COVID response?
Yeah, I think without a doubt, Rick. I mean, obviously, a lot of things have changed in terms of the span of control of the governor's office. To that end, the governor's office has worked with the House and the Senate to change some items that may have been a stumbling block in the past. I think we've seen that with the ability for them to start processing some of the ballots earlier. The bill went through and was signed by the governor, and I think that's a good testimony of the fact that not only can we, but we will and we should work together. And anytime you have an election, there's always there's feelings that are hurt, and we want to make sure that people can get things back to working. But the reality is that we work for the people, and all of us should work tenaciously to make sure that we can deliver what the people expect us to do, and that's good governance. I think especially in the face of COVID, there's uncertainty. We all have uncertainty as to what it's going to look like. The trajectory doesn't look great in terms of the numbers, but we'll continue to work with, especially on the appropriations side, to ensure that we have the resources required to protect and help our people.
Well, when you talk about appropriations, there still is some question about what the revenues are going to look like. And there is also a question about whether there will be another shutdown here in the state, or even a national shutdown, as some have rumored. What kind of financial situation is the state in as you look towards the next fiscal year?
Yeah, it's hard to take a crystal ball and say what the next year looks like, but I did see a recent report that showed the actual revenue for October, and it was up slightly. So I think it's fair to say that our economy is much stronger, much more resilient than we think, despite the fact that people, businesses, that we've all had to change so many things about our lives, the way things work, the way that we work together. But I think the American people, the people of Michigan, and people for the 74th District have been responsive. We see fast with the wearing of masks, we see hand washing, we see social distancing. We've seen businesses that want to take care of their people and their customers. And that's a testimony when we see the revenue numbers come in. And even though things are different and changing, it's problematic when we look at what, if you were saying from a status quo perspective, but we need to make sure that we continue to prioritize the public health need. And there's no doubt the budget next year will probably be as mysterious as this year. I think we really did about 3 budgets this year. The governor's recommendation, the revenue estimating conference report in March was dismal, and then the one in August was put us back to almost status quo. So many uncertainties, but that's what we're here to do, is to stand up and support the people for our districts, and to do the right thing with the dollars, and to ensure that we can recover in a fair and equitable manner.
As we move into the holiday season and COVID continues to be a concern, we will hear much more about the number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. All that could mean more changes to our schools, our work, and our daily routine. We'll follow it every week to the point.